be achieved and records to be surpassed. So who's to say we couldn't surpass 200 years in a tasting at some point next year. Anyway, here we go. Thanks for joining us tonight. Our lineup should be in the chat. I know that somebody else just joined again, so I'll throw it in there one more time. It's pretty epic. This tasting came about, I keep remembering I'm at a different computer. I've got 2 computers here and 2 keyboards, and I got to focus on this one. We've got 8 25-year-old whiskeys to get through. And we should probably just quickly dive into that without saying anything else. However, I will just quickly add, if you're in the Calgary area, we do have a Cadenhead tasting coming up that we've just added to the schedule with Jenna McIntosh from Cadenhead Distillery. That's coming up a week Saturday. It's a great tasting. There's going to be some cool new blends in it. And I think one other thing is worth quickly mentioning, because we finally are able to share it. But we've got the design work for our 2023 whiskey calendar. So if you haven't seen it yet, we're pretty proud of it. It looks pretty damn sexy. There's some Easter eggs on the back there for you. We don't have to waste too much time with. But one of the things that's really unique this year is that we actually had to have our own labels designed. So we're still not going to tell you what's in the calendar until you open it day by day. But we gave you a little rendering there of what you might find inside it. Super excited about this one. And without any bluster or exaggeration, because we've not had to rely on bottled 50 ml stock this year, this is without question the best edition we have ever put out. So I suppose that I could say that with the exception of the Uber edition, but that's a whole different story we don't need to get into, and it's already sold out anyway. So thanks for joining us. I've got Kurt and James here with me tonight, and we're going to start off with the Single Malts of Scotland Speyside 25-year-old, and I'm just going to pull it up here and I'll share my screen with you in a second. But this is a cool whiskey. It took forever to get here. You know, things are still a little slow on the international shipping side of things, but we were really excited to get this because Sean and I tried this last fall in Paris and it completely blew us away. They had a Glenfarclas out at the same time, which I believe we have now. That's a nice whiskey, but this Speyside 25-year-old really jumped out, really caught our attention, and it's a lovely, lovely bottling. And if you know anything about this distillery, this is a fairly old release from Speyside Distillery. Speyside Distillery has not been producing for very long. In fact, I think it, Kurt, do you know this fact? Does it date from the 80s or the 70s? It's a relatively recent distillery, Speyside Distillery. But this was matured in 3X bourbon barrels, bottled at 52.6%. And I think it's a great place to start us off tonight. So feel free to share any tasting notes you have, any questions in the chat. Kurt, 1990, there we go. I was kind of right. It was somewhere in the 80s or 90s, right? Literally right in the middle. I can polish any turd, I assure you. Kurt, why don't I start with you? What are your thoughts on this one? Oh, I gotta unmute you. Is that the? Did I not give you powers yet? Here, let me give you powers again.
You gave me powers.
James,
I know how this works.
Powers. There you go, Kurt. You're free.
Powerless, story of my life. Good to see so many faces. I just saw a couple of you guys in the shop over the last couple of days. Man, you and Sean came back raving about this whiskey. You said it was going to land our way. I didn't grab one. I don't know what we've got left for stock. This is my kind of perfect contemporary Speyside whiskey. It's not the old school quite. It doesn't have those same kind of tropicalia you get at this age, but it's the perfect new school style. Vibrant fruits, good spice profile, and I can't help but cheat. Your tasting notes on the screen there, I think it was yours, that said mint. Perfect note. There's a really, really pretty mint top note to it.
Yeah, it's a cool dram. James, do you want to share some thoughts since we've deputized you?
Yeah, careful what you've done here. You do realize I'm an agent, right? Yeah, this to me is just like textbook good quality modern American oak, just coconut, pineapple. It's like you kind of like walk past someone at the beach that just put on sunscreen, and you kind of like sniff and you're like, oh, that reminds me of my favorite whiskey. And then they look at you funny because you shouldn't do that in public. But yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind with this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tropical, toasty. 3X bourbon barrels is interesting because it makes you wonder if they might be refill, because it's not like in your face aggressive oak, which you might get after 25 years. It's lush. There's a floral element there to it. Kurt, you're bang on. This is not kind of that old school style of whiskey, but it's very good new school bottling, creamy, decadent. And you know, just to quickly put this in perspective, so this brand is the distillery, not the independent bottling single malt of Scotland, to be very clear here. The Spey brand is like possibly the worst brand of any distillery in Scotland. The whiskeys, the bottles are weird. They look like something that someone's Scottish grandma would have dreamt up. You know, the grandma that's got the terrible tartan carpet in her house. And they're a weird shape. They don't look good.
They won't fit on any shelf.
Yeah, they don't fit. And instead of investing in packaging, I mean, they could have put it in a tall round bottle with a basic label and I would have been thrilled. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's just your basic cheapest bottle of liquor. I'm sure I've got one around here somewhere. Like, it's basically just this. Just put it in this with a label. Don't get fancy. And nobody wants them because they're just, the packaging is ugly. But to have a 25-year-old from that distillery, I mean, this blows away anything else I've had from Speyside Distillery.
There was they did a tasting with us a couple of years back, and the core range is a little bit milquetoast, but there was an 18 in that range that was absolutely lights out. And I don't know if you can find it around. Like Andrew says, they're hideous freaking bottles. They'll either be top shelf or bottom shelf in most stores. But if you can find that 18, well worth buying. Really, really cool grapefruit tones on it. They're absolutely stunning.
Well, and to be fair, it's a tough road to hoe if your distillery is called Speyside, which is also a region that has most of Scotland's distilleries in it. You know, there was a joke. I know Valence and Mallet did a Speyside bottling, and the joke is, what distillery is this from? Because everyone thought it was a secret bottling. And he's like, no, it's from Speyside Distillery. Yeah, but what distillery? And it's like one of those things that kind of goes in an infinity circle. But like they hired or they connected with some like has-been English footballer, and like that was their marketing campaign, but no one cared. So anyway, I don't even know if you can buy them anymore in this market, to be totally honest.
No, I think it would just be playing the Dusties game. I know there's still a bunch of people that like to go out and do the scavenger hunt thing. It's getting a little bit fewer and further between that you actually find anything worth buying. But that is one of the real sleepers out there you may still find around.
I don't think I made it the time of day, Kurt, because I hated the packaging so much.
Yeah, it was only because was it Paul Dempsey, I think, rep them?
Yeah,
I think so. And when he came through and poured them for us and did that tasting in the store, I was absolutely stunned by the 18. I mean, again, it's kind of like something like a Brackla or a Lochnagar or something stunning you, because nobody expects it. So when they come out of nowhere like that, it's like, man, this is bloody cool.
Mhm.
But just real quickly before we move on to the next, we talk about those old school whiskeys a lot, then we talk about these new school ones. And I think there's kind of the implication behind it when we say it, that we're sort of denigrating the new school a little bit. There has absolutely been an element of that. But I think we just have to realize we're in a different era. Whiskey is produced differently, and we have to stop playing the whole, oh, this isn't like it used to be game anymore, and just look for absolute apex malts of this kind of new style.
But Kurt, we're both now on the back half of 40. Like, that's what we're supposed to do. Everything is supposed to be referenced back to the past.
Old Kensington men shouted clouds.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a lovely bottling, and I think that's what we should really be focusing on.
True.
I love Jeff's comment in here that he thought it was like the signatory Speyside brackets M, which is pretty funny. But no, I mean, it can still be great. And you know what? I'm sure that Valence and Mallet Speyside 25-year-old or 30-year-old, whatever it is great too. But you know, it's just a shame that the distillery itself should rebrand, call yourself something other than Speyside Distillery. And for the love of God, don't let your 80-year-old Scottish grandma decide what the packaging should be. James, after we've just kind of totally gone off on a rant there, anything constructive you might want to add before we move on?
No, I kind of just want to let Kurt go on a long rant for the next hour and a half.
Okay.
I'll say nothing but good things, I promise.
Still delicious. I just had another sip. I can't wait to see how delicious it still is at the end of all this. But we should stray into something that probably also doesn't get quite as much love as it should. I just realized the mistake of putting these on my laptop is that I can't reach the keyboard. So let's see if I can fix that problem. This is what happens when I have to go into the shop to host a tasting the last second. All right, Balblair 25.
Is it
I
Bowmore?
mean, what's that, Kurt?
It's Glenfarclas next, isn't it?
Is it Glen? Is it? Oh.
Yeah, I've got Glenfarclas next.
You know what? You're right. And I'm glad, because that makes more sense just purely looking at the color of these two beasts. So Glenfarclas 25 it is. Bear with me for a moment. Kurt, you want to start saying something nice about Glenfarclas while I pull this up? And not just because Bernadette's in the tasting.
I'd love to. But you said the color of these two beasts. I don't think I've told anybody here this, but we were in Saskatchewan over the summer, and I'm a pasty white guy, way too much Scottish blood flowing through these veins. And my youngest daughter's got a lot of my wife's blood in her, much darker, even though she's English, believe it or not. We were standing on the street in shorts, and she put her leg up to mine, and she goes, "Dad, we don't even look like we're the same race." Shameful. Anyways, just reminding me of that. So I can't lie. This may have been the whiskey I was least looking forward to in this range. I've drunk gallons of Glenfarclas 25, and I haven't found the recent batches to be rock stars. They've been good, of course, but nothing that's been crazy exciting. This is an absolutely awesome batch, and the best Glenfarclas 25 batch I've come across in a few years, I think.
Which is saying something, because they're not even bottling it right now, if I remember correctly.
I did not expect that at all.
Here we go. Let's put it up on the screen. This has been a stalwart. It has changed quite a bit over the last, let's say, decade or so. Like, I remember a time when this was quite heavily sherried, and just looking at the color, this is going back a bit more into that sherry direction than it was in some recent years. In some years, it's been getting a touch paler. Admittedly, in Glenfarclas's defense on this, like, for too long, they were the value proposition for aged Speyside whiskey. And I think they still are a value proposition for aged Speyside whiskey. But especially with their family cast, they got to the point where they were practically giving the stuff away relative to what other big companies were charging for their mature stock. And I think they just ate through it. And now they're at a point where they're actually taking a sober look at everything they have and saying, how do we need to manage this so that we can continue releasing the same caliber of bottlings moving forward? And we could talk about, Kurt, why we think that is, but it's probably best not to tell tales out of school, especially about a good friend of ours that used to be heavily connected to the distillery and is not anymore, which will not be spoken about. But I think they're trying to kind of get their bearings again as a company.
I'm blown away by this.
What's that?
I'm blown away by the nose on this tonight.
Well, it's funny because just after what you said, like, this is starting to go back to kind of more of an old school style of Speyside whiskey. Speyside.
I think the problem I've had with a lot of Glenfarclas 25s over the last couple of years, and again, we're talking about the cream of the crop here, so I'm saying a problem, I still adore it. But they've drunk younger than their age. I think they've probably had, we know Glenfarclas goes pretty deep on cask usage. We see a lot that say third fill or fourth fill. Fourth fill basically means they don't know what fill it is. So could be third, could be fourth, could be second, but they just don't know. I think we've seen a lot that were probably in tired barrels. This seems a lot more vibrant to me. It seems like there's a lot more fruit coming through, a lot more spice coming through. And there's some of those notes that we talk about, like just old whiskey, old bookish kind of old woods, really pretty.
Mhm. James, do you want to share some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I always think it's interesting to note that Glenfarclas gets most of their sherry butts from the exact same supplier that Billy got over the years at Glendronach and now at Glenalgie. And so you see that difference in philosophy. I would agree. Like I've had a lot of 25 batches that I thought like, oh man, this is like, some calf snuck into this batch that aren't great. This is lovely. Especially it has a note to it that I don't see very often anymore. I used to always get it from Bowmore's kind of, like 15, 20 years ago, which is that like walking in to like a bakery and kind of like smelling like the cinnamon roll dough. That it's a note you just don't see very often in whiskey anymore.
I mean,
So,
is this
but-
a like back when Delmore was fun and cool kind of comment?
Yeah.
Back when it was affordable, expensive.
Yeah, the last expression that I thought from Dalmore had that note was something called the Mackenzie. And after that, I never came across it again.
That Delmore Mackenzie release was phenomenal, and then it kind of started to go downhill from there. James, that's a great note. I can really see that. Like I've often thrown in like going into like a French patisserie or a French bakery and that kind of tone. There's some nice fruity tones in this. Like there's almost something Calvados-like on the palate to it. There's this really bright baked apple thing. That cinnamon note you brought up is a good one too. But I just love how the sherry on this is prominent and it's bold without being overpowering and without going into some of those sort of bitter, astringent notes that you get in some of the newer school sherry whiskeys.
I'm kind of an all or none guy with sherry most of the time. Those that are kind of slightly sherry profiled or finished or whatever, they don't seem to work all that well for me. I like the big dark goopy ones, or I like ex-bourbon typically. This is just a really restrained one. The palate, a little shy. There's a really cool note on there. Glenfarclas is probably the most identifiable palate to me in Scotch whiskey. Nose, you can kind of find some hit and miss, like whether I can get it or not. Palate though, they're back end, and Andrew, James, you can probably geek out with this to me. Bernadette, I know, was here somewhere. I don't see your face now. Glenfarclas direct fire is the wash still, right? And I think when you're direct firing still, those little bits of particulate that they're rummaging out and stuff, you're actually burning those little bits to the bottom of the still. And I think that kind of burnt note carries through to the back end of the palate a little bit.
Well, it's like you're actually caramelizing sugars that are in the still before they have a chance to be consumed. So there's definitely an element of that. Yeah, I can see a little bit of that. You know what's interesting to think about on this is that the 21 in the Glenfarclas range has always been a favorite of mine. And it's been a favorite because it's usually been more spirit forward than sherry forward. And what I love in that one is I get this nice, like creamy pie crust, like overly like sugared blueberry pie note that comes through it. And I'm getting a little bit of that in this 25 year, like that residual blueberry sugar on my palate, which is quite nice.
It's quite neat too that, like you mentioned, the 21. I've loved particular vintages, if you will, of the 21. I've gone to the 15 is my favorite for a while. I've gone to the 25 is my favorite for a while, and then the 40. I haven't spent enough time with the 30, so it's just I've had it a few times, but not enough. But it's cool to see that sort of inconsistency, as ridiculous as that sounds. To me, that's the hallmark of what we talked about last time. You're batting for quality, not consistency. That's key. So I like seeing that little bit of variance. Oh, this one's better than the last one.
Well, I'm 100% on board with that. I mean, I know that even the distilleries that we think are cool and that we think don't try to achieve batch variance tell you that they try to achieve batch variance, but it's the medium and small size guys that where you have those bigger swings. And I think they're far more interesting whiskeys because of that. So,
Sure.
All right. Can we finally go to Balblair? I'm kidding. Just go to it because I was one ahead of everybody a few minutes ago. So let me pull that up on my screen here. As I was saying before about Balblair, I kind of feel like this is another distillery that maybe doesn't get as much due as it should. We had a gorgeous Gordon MacPhail cask of Balblair earlier in the year, sadly all gone. But the distillery produces great whiskey. I think it's kind of suffered something of an identity crisis because I just don't think they've figured out how how to sell it to people or how to brand it. And, you know, they started with vintages, they've gone back to age statements. The packaging's fine. The boxes are frustrating as a retailer because they're basically double wide, or you have to turn them. But I've been happy with everything that comes out of the distillery. Balblair, if those don't know, is a Northern Highland distillery, not far from Glenmorangie. Yeah, it's one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland. If I remember correctly, I think it's 1798, something like that, that it traces its origin back to. But let's jump in on this. Secondary maturation in Oloroso sherry after starting in ex-bourbon. And they're saying seasoned Spanish oak ex-sherry, bottled at 46%. And James, why don't I put you on the spot this time first to start? Do you have any thoughts on the Balblair?
Yeah, well, I definitely will echo that Balblair is a classic example of like a failure of marketing, but I think part of it isn't their fault, because there should be this like cluster of single malts for the consumer that includes Dalmore, includes Clynelish, and Balblair, like maybe Tannic, but a lot of their like kind of quote unquote siblings, maybe Glen Ord you'd put in that category, like you can't get them, or they're like hyper commercialized like Dalmore is. So
Yeah.
Balblair, I feel like, is kind of like sitting there like the last person without a partner at the dance floor, being like, hey, like I'm the classic Highland. Does anyone want to like buy me? And everyone's like, no, we don't buy just normal Highlands. We either, you know, buy super luxury ones or we buy single casks from independent bottlers.
Yeah. We want the super luxury ones with E150 in them.
Yeah.
Not the straight goods. Kurt?
Yeah. I mean, meanwhile, this stuff is just like absolutely textbook.
I was, after the first two and that Glenfarclas showing as well as it did, I thought I was just being hyper forgiving and optimistic tonight. I noticed through the range, this whole range has got really pretty noses. And I'm like, how does the whole range smell this good? I'm like, yeah, we get jaded sometimes. We're drinking, every single one of these is 25 years old. That's a lot of oxidation. That's a lot of development. The Balblair here, the nose on it, wicked. The tasting notes that you put up on the screen, Andrew, I wish I'd written those tasting notes. That's one of the first times I've seen producer tasting notes that I thought were absolutely spot on. Those overripe apricot notes that they mentioned and everything that's in there, the tobacco and all that kind of stuff. I love those notes. Really cool notes.
I have two follow-ups or comments on that, Kurt. I agree. I think most producer tasting notes are absolute rubbish. Point number one. Point number two, one thing to think about everything in this lineup being interesting is all of this whiskey was put into cask, at least initially put into cask, before the current boom in single malts that we're in started. Like, this is all stuff that was made in the 1990s. And if you think about that, this is an era when even distilleries like Lagavulin were only running 2 days a week. And we're talking like 2 shifts a week. So not like 2 24-hour days, like 2 8-hour shifts a week. The industry was still recovering from the crash of the 1980s. So does that play a role in that? Will we be thinking as fondly of 25-year-old whiskeys 5 years from now or 10 years from now, when we've got a ton of stuff that was made in the mid to late 2010s? At a point, I should add, when, like, you remember Springbank shut down for 8 months because they thought the price of barley in casks was too high.
This is kind of geeky stuff that I hope was kind of interesting to some of you guys that don't get on our side of it. We're very much downstream, right? So by the time things are slowing down on the retail front, they've already slowed down behind the scenes at wholesalers and like all the way down the chain, casks being moved out of the warehouse and everything like that. Do you think this is a case of stuff that was produced at a time when things were produced a lot more variably and interestingly, I would possibly argue, and being casked possibly, or sorry, bottled, vatted and bottled at a time when things have started to slow down a little bit? Like, at that point, you don't have pressures on your old stock, so you can vat better things together. If these are all contemporary bottlings, they're all really damn good.
Well, I mean, the spirit, as far as the spirit goes, I mean, I think this is a period where they weren't rushing themselves. They didn't have huge production quotas. Most distilleries probably would have been operating like a regular 4 shifts a week or 5 shifts a week. This is where they were getting to the point where they were building back up. You know, the Balblair, I think, is probably some good cask management on the part of that company, where at some point in the last, let's say 10 to 15 years, they decided to re-rack some of what they had in bourbon into sherry, and it's worked really nicely. I mean, this is not a quick speed finishing. This is more elegant, a little bit more balanced than that. But yeah, I think that's honestly, I think it's not enough weight is put on the quality of spirit that's being made. And that's not to say that a lot of people are making better quality spirit, but I think there is something lost in the rush to increase volumes that happened about 2008 to 2015.
Yeah, this is the conundrum, is that there probably is more high quality spirit being produced since 2008. But alongside that, there's an ocean of probably mediocre spirit that's been pumped out.
Yeah. I hate to slag anyone, but I remember being at Laphroaig around 2010 or 2012. And the tour guide was bragging to me that they'd switched to a new yeast and they had their fermentation time down to something like 38 hours. It was like 38 or 40 hours. And that was something to be proud of. It just meant they could make more of it more quickly. And does that mean that Laphroaig since 20, whenever that was, is less Laphroaig than it used to be? Or I don't know. Yeah, Kurt's gonna to go mom on that.
I heard some words at the distillery when I was there 2 months ago or whatever, spoken by an employee. I'm not going to repeat in this group, so maybe private conversations when you come in and say hi to us. Yeah, you're dead on that.
Put it in the chat and people could choose to read it, Kurt, and that wouldn't go live in the video.
But it's being recorded though, isn't it?
Well, you don't get that. People on YouTube and Facebook don't get to see the chat. So,
all right.
Which is not an invitation for people to cross the line. No crossing of the line, unless it's humorous, and most everyone will find it funny. But anyway, let's go on to the first of 2 Gordon MacPhail bottlings we have. James, since we have you on, I think it seems only fair that if you feel so inclined that we let you introduce this one. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, basically the distillery label series is kind of an homage that they keep producing to kind of honor like the initial whiskeys they would have released at the shop in the late 1800s. So, you know, there was a period of time, of course, where Gordon MacPhail was the only source of single malts from a lot of now very famous distilleries, right? I think Linkwood is one of those. You know, I don't think there's been many official bottlings from Diageo, but Mortlach, and of course, even historically, you know, Pulteney, Highland Park, Macallan, Glen Grant were all really part of this range. So, yeah, I remember Richard saying once that there's kind of like the saying, right? Like, you don't close your first shop, and that's why they keep pumping this stuff out. Mm-hmm. But we know we have at least 25 more years of this product, which is pretty exciting. So the cask would have been filled in 2023 of both Linkwood and Mortlach. Mm-hmm. So, and they planned this in advance, Andrew. Like, I'm sure you're aware, but like every cask that is destined for this is like decided at birth, basically. Like they have, that's how much they have this dialed in.
Well, and it's how much faith they have in their ability to procure the right casks, which, you know, I'd say not every company has that same degree of confidence or care, especially when you're buying in enormous volumes. But it is good to know that we're going to continue to see this for a period, because I mean, for me, I remember the good old days when, you know, you could get Strathala 40 and it wasn't such a big deal and it was relatively reasonably priced, and things have changed. And obviously some things have changed in a drastic way, but whiskeys like the Linkwood 25 and the Mortlach 25 are an example of a company that's still putting out good quality products that are aged at a fair price relative to everything else that's going on in the market, that are being sold at a very fair price.
What I'll also say is, you know, even though they've profited from the boom like everybody else, I mean, where did they put that money? Did they like bonus out their family? No, they built a new distillery and they rebuilt their original building. Like they specifically invested that money in like long-term investments.
Yeah, no, it's a great company. All right, so what have we got here? We've got Linkwood, matured in refill and first fill sherry casks, bottled at 46%. Kurt, do you want to lead us off on this one?
Yeah, one of my favorite distilleries, especially when it's got a good chunk of age on it. We've been lucky enough to see a bunch of them through. We've got a great 18-year-old OMC. I think we used it in a tasting a few months back too. We've talked about this a few times. One of Diageo's top dressing malts. It's meant to add a big chunk to a blend. You've got a whiskey like that. It's meant to actually not just be a component to it, but a real chunk of the flavor. And I think when you try something like this, you can kind of see why. The distillate is good. However, there's no two ways about it. You get somebody like G&M at the helm for wood and, you know, how that spirit is stewarded, and you get something that's going to be a hell of a lot better than what Diageo would release. So I'm glad so much of it ended up in the hands of G&M.
Mm-hmm. James?
I think like naturally I would think if I wanted this refill cast 25-year-old Linkwood that you would want it in American oak. And I think there are some American oak sherry butts in here, but you know, it's amazing how Linkwood has this ability to soak up this heavy sherry and still show that like sherbety citrus quality that like every single G&M Linkwood has.
Mm-hmm.
Like it like fizzes on the palate.
Well, and not only that, but it's also got this fluffy character that I find Linkwood from ex-bourbon and refill casks also has. Like it's retained that floral, like kind of fluffy profile to it. Like it is a fascinating spirit. You know, it's one of those distilleries that I would love to go and visit that's not open to the public because, you know, it's a workhorse for the Diageo blends. Occasionally they'll let us try it in one of their flora and fauna bottlings, but it's not something we get to see on the regular. And I think that's just too bad.
Well, we know who to call if we want to try to get in there for a tour.
Oh, if that can be arranged, that would be fun. Because
I did ask, and there was some looks exchanged that made me think it is possible.
They maybe just don't tell them that Andrew Ferguson's part of the tour, just to be safe. There's some nice licorice tones in this. Leather, tobacco, chocolate, all in a nice balance. Candied fruit, lots going on here. This is great sherry, nice finish, really well balanced. Any other comments, Kurt?
It's got this and the Balblair side by side, 46%ers, big, rich, fruity whiskeys. There seems to be more weight on the palate to this for me. It just sits a little bit sweeter, more syrupy, not quite as grippy as the Balblair. You know, the Balblair just seemed kind of gentle on the palate. This one just seems a little bit weightier. I like that.
There's definitely batch variation in these Linkwood 25s too.
Well, I mean, how big are these batches? Like we're talking.
Yeah, probably 15 butts. I don't know.
If that. I mean, for the 25, I'd be shocked if it's that big a batch.
Well, I mean, spoiler alert, I asked for a maximum allocation of the 25, and yeah, I mean, there's like 250 bottles that were offered to me for it, and that was taking the whole US allocation.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about that then. Like, let's just assume that the US gets 25% or 10% of the global. And if you divide that down, that's 2,500 bottles. That's probably 5 to 8 butts.
Yeah.
So it's not a lot. So that's why you could probably see a bunch of variation. Incidentally, I think our website says we have this. We might be out, but we are getting more. And there's a reason why our website says we have it. And I can't get into what that is. And I don't invite speculation, but there is some on the way shortly. Is the more important thing to
Evening staff.
I should mention, Andrew, in the chat, people are talking about the boxes. I don't know if it's tongue in cheek, it might be, and then I'll look silly, but I do know that these kind of goofy cardboard window boxes they do, those were designed specifically kind of like the new Ben Romick packaging to hit like future targets for packaging and emissions. So that wasn't like a marketer or a designer saying like, hey, look what I did. It was like working backwards from a goal.
I think the comment was more to do with the oak boxes,
Oh, right.
which might be betraying someone's buying habits, if much of what they're purchasing is in wood. But just saying, they're nice boxes. So, but as Willie Tate once said when he was here for a tasting, you can't eat the box. So if it went away, would we miss it? Also, that was one of the funniest things that anyone ever said in a tasting without realizing there was another unintended connotation. But alas, let's move on to the next whiskey. Where are we? We're on to the Mortlach, right? Mortlach 25. So like the Linkwood 25, this is, I would say, James, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I think next to Glen Grant, the two distilleries most recognized with Gordon MacPhail must be Mortlach and Linkwood. I mean,
yeah, and I think it's safe to say that, maybe part of the decision was realizing that the day of getting the call from Mortlach being cut off was definitely coming. Ditto for Kalila.
mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that factored into the decision. But yeah, slightly different proportion. Even though color-wise it looks very similar, I do know that there's slightly less first fill sherry in the Mortlach.
Okay, so maybe
in theory it should be slightly more spirit driven.
All right, well, we'll see what we get here. So I've shared it and also sent out the link, but as with the Linkwood, this is first fill and refill sherry cask, 46%. And this does vary a little bit from batch to batch, but I mean, just purely going by color, it's almost a toss up, but the Mortlach to me almost looks like it's a touch darker than the Linkwood. Kurt, you're already well into chewing your whiskey. What have you found?
Mortlach is a whiskey. It's one of those ones we tell a lot of customers is challenging whiskey. First poured it in the glass, I was kind of cool with it. Longer it's in the glass, I'm kind of like, okay, this one's a little bit chubby and dumpy and heavy for me. Not my style as it's opened up a little bit. Those kind of natural sulfuric tones are getting a little bit bigger for me. The palate is a little bit redeeming, but this is not my favorite.
Yeah, but it's Mortlach. Mortlach's supposed to be a little bit beefy, and
it is.
Definitely dumpy.
Sometimes when it's one of those distilleries to me that when it's on, it is on. Some of my absolute favorite whiskeys of all time have been Mortlachs. Some of my least favorite have as well. And there's been a historicity of a ton of sulfured Mortlachs. This, I don't find sulfured in terms of that heavy, nasty, flawed kind of thing. This is just the distillery character. But in this particular one, I think it's the weight of the distillery, or the weight of the sherry on top of it that's just making it a little bit too lumbering for me.
So, Kurt, if I'm hearing you correctly, this is an example of how you can't put lipstick on a pig.
Not quite. I get where you're going there.
Because to be honest, I like it. This is meaty. It's rich. There's like Christmas cake, brown sugar. My sister-in-law's pecan pie is coming out of this for me too. The nose for me isn't quite as beautiful as the Linkwood, but I like the palate. Mortlach is a spirit that's made to be matured in sherry. Like it needs sherry casks. I've had some good ex-bourbon Mortlach, but those are not common. And like you said, there's no flaw in this in terms of the sherry, but maybe this is a preference thing. Because for me, I really like that meaty style. I really like that meaty, rich, spicy profile.
I lean more into farmy and barnyardy kind of old school, more so than meaty and savory kind of style. But I should add too, though, that the G&M Mortlach 15 is one of my favorite 15s in the market.
I would even add that this is starting to go a bit tropical on the back end too. You're starting to see some of those tropical fruits popping through, which reminds me of that 22-year-old Mortlach that we did, that first fill bourbon one that was just decadent, juicy tropical fruit.
I think I have some of that. That might be my after dram tonight. Now that you said that,
I should. Well, if I'd had more time to prepare for Tellus, I would have packed an after dram for my drive home, but alas, I did not. And not driving my Uber home, clearly not driving. Just really want to be clear about that. James, would you like to weigh in on the Mortlach 25?
Yeah, this does remind me of, the Glenfarclas 25 has that, like, we're talking about almost that burnt from the whatever those like chains that clean out the bottom and
The
of the
rummagers.
still. Yeah, for sure. Like that's where that note comes from. And with Mortlach, of course, it's more of a process thing. I sometimes think like Mortlach is just starting to become like drinkable at 25 in terms of like showing its hand. Like it feels like a spirit that was designed to be matured 40 years.
Yeah, but so here's the challenging thing for me with Mortlach. How is the whiskey so bloody robust? And we know they use worm tubs, but how is it so robust if it's 2.81 times distilled? It's almost triple distilled whiskey. It shouldn't be as weighty as it is, I wouldn't think.
Well, it's 2.81 times distilled.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a good point, but I mean, maybe that's that rapid condensation in the worm tubs that's playing a big role in that, in how it's coming across.
So Springbank uses worms, and Hazelburn is triple distilled and doesn't come across with that kind of heaviness.
Springbank's, I'm pretty confident, has the condensers, doesn't it?
No, worm, one worm, one condenser, I think.
Okay. Who
A mystery.
knows? What's that?
But I was gonna say it's a mystery, but it's amazing how consistent it is.
For sure.
Whereas I feel like other worm tub distilleries, you get this character sometimes, but not always. Mortlach is consistent.
I think the closest to them would be probably Craig Ellachie in terms of style. Different casking, but same kind of weediness. Glengoyne time?
You're right, Kurt. I fact checked you there. There's one worm tub and 2 condensers at Springbank. So
I had to be right at some point, man.
I'm as my wife and daughter will certainly attest, I am rarely right. So I suppose this is my happy place. Anyway, I really like this Mortlach. I think it shows really well. And I think it's about time we move on to another kind of legendary 25-year-old. This is one that has admittedly crept up in price quite a bit in recent years. And I think, there's no mystery there that the demand for this is surpassed what they're able to supply globally. So it's not something we always have in stock. And I am talking about the Glengoyne 25-year-old. One interesting little note about Glengoyne that's worth addressing before we go on is that both Glengoyne and its sister distillery, Tamdhu, were at one point in time part of the Edrington Group. And the Edrington Group, for those who don't know, owns Macallan. And I've really felt for a long time that Glengoyne, and more recently Tamdhu, because I've not known the whiskey as long, were really kind of the new Macallans in terms of style and weight, especially Tamdhu, which I think has a heavier spirit than Glengoyne does, although Glengoyne does seem to stand up very well to the sherry. But the interesting thing is that if you go to Glengoyne and Tamdhu, they have absolutely no qualms about telling you that they still buy the sherry cask that Macallan used to buy, and that in some ways they're more Macallan-esque than Macallan, which is awesome. Who doesn't love some blunt honesty and a little playful nudge every now and then? So Kurt, Glengoyne, you were there recently.
I was. It was the first time I was there, actually. Really, really pretty distillery. I think you told me that before I even went.
It's
Setting is
also
gorgeous.
the most dangerous distillery to get to from the parking lot.
It's like playing Frogger, if you don't know.
It is like playing Frogger.
Yeah, gorgeous distillery. We did the blending experience there. So here's my my little bespoke Glengoyne blend. Definitely do that if you get a chance, if you get over there. I wasn't the biggest Glengoyne fan until I guess maybe the last. When did the 15 launch? The new 15 earlier this year, right? late
Like-
last year.
18 months ago.
Yeah. When that came out, I kind of sat back and went, whoa, there's something really cool here. Some of those 25s and 30s have been just a little not my style. This batch of 25 is probably the best I've had. I really, really like this. It's way more vibrant than I expected. Glengoyne to me is really, really heavy on chocolatey tones that kind of override everything else. This to me is kind of the fruits coming through more. It's those Brookside chocolate things we've talked about with the fruit in the middle kind of thing. Really, really cool whiskey.
This is it. I mean, to me, it's still quite chocolatey, especially on the nose,
Mhm.
but on the palate, it's chocolatey, it's syrupy, it's fruity. On the nose, you're getting more of those like big leather tobacco tones creeping in, those eat more candy bar notes that I personally love. But then on the palate, it is rounder and more fruity.
Yeah, that's a really good batch of that. Definitely the best batch of Glengoyne 25 I've had.
James, thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking the same thing, that this batch, that Glengoyne tasting you did about a year ago, this feels, I don't know if it's the same bottle, but it feels like a different batch. That one had a little bit more bitterness. The main difference I noticed on this one that one didn't have is a note I usually get on whiskeys over 30 years, which is that like jube kind of fruit note on the nose, like that candy.
yeah.
And
I
it's
can see that on the
definitely,
palate. Like the palate's like chocolate covered jujubes, which if you've
Yeah.
never had them, are delicious.
the other note I get in here, which I also got a touch in the Mortlach, but it shows up here, is there's almost like an herbaceous note on the finish that is almost reminiscent of cannabis.
Mm,
Like the tobacco, but it's like it's more pungent.
mm.
I wouldn't know.
I can see that. I've cannabis has crept up in tasting notes for me every once in a while. My wife's a bigger fan of cannabis than I am. But I can see that on the finish. Like it's got that kind of oily, like almost a hash oil sort of vibe to it.
I second Jeff's comment too. Gordon, if you've not met Gordon Dundas, next time he's through town, next virtual tasting, we should do something with him soon, actually. Speaking of, he's a prince of a man, absolutely incredible. We walked into the pot still a couple months ago in Glasgow. He was hoping to come find us. And he's a big dude. I literally watched him looking around for us in this crowded room, like scanning over everybody. And we walked in the door and he caught my eye and he ran right over with this great big bear hug and stuff. Like just a really, really kind soul, beautiful personality, really outgoing. You know, I love the guy. We need an excuse to do an event with him soon, Andrew.
Yeah, we'll make that happen. I mean, he comes around from time to time, but yeah, I'm not gonna lie, Kurt. I'm actually on your profile trying to find the photo you posted of yourself and Gordon. I think I've nearly got it here. Oh, here we go. Here we go. We're gonna share this. So looks like these guys are having a good time, right? Yeah. No, Gordon's a great dude. Despite the fact that he didn't get either of us into Rosebank again, because it's not open yet, which is totally fair. But another time. Yeah, I think this Glengoyne is great. And I always love bringing up this comparison for people, even at the current price, which is $7.25. And bear with me here for a second. I usually have this, I want to make sure of my numbers here, but I always like to do a price comparison with Macallan 25, as in how many Glengoyne 25s can you get for a bottle of Macallan 25 at 43%? And the answer is, I think 8. At present, you could have 8 Glengoyne 25s for a single bottle of Macallan 25 at 43%. So
that should be our sub price now. Under our retail price, we should put like what percentage of a Macallan 25 it is.
that'd be funny. We should do comparables, because like there's a lot of interesting comparables we could do there.
For sure.
Like for a good Isla whiskey, like how many Port Ellen 40-year-olds would this buy you? So, which we don't even get. But James and I were going down this rabbit hole just before we started this tasting, Kurt. It's an interesting path. All right. Where
the
are
Spade
we?
malt this year is 25 years old, by the way.
Oh, damn, son. You're gonna have to get us some more details on that when the time comes.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're on to Bowmore. Are we on to Bowmore? Does that sound right to everybody?
Yes. I can't tell you how much I love the fact that we're getting Bowmore with age that isn't just an absolute lavender slap in the face. It makes me so happy.
I mean, I don't mind that, but at the same time, that the nose on this is lovely. So here we are. This is the current Bowmore 25-year-old. Come on. 43% ex-bourbon and ex-sherry casks. Not a lot there. It is sad to see where this has gone price-wise. However, Old Isla whiskey is not inexpensive anymore, no matter where you get it. I mean, Kurt, what's the Ardbeg 25 now is well north of $1,000, right?
Yeah, I think it was closer to 15 months.
Yeah. So, I mean, there have been good ones that have come through here. Some, well, these ones might not have been quite in Kurt's wheelhouse, but like the Isla Violets from Elements of Isla, the Port Ask, what was it? The Pete's Beast 34-year. There
Yep.
were some great, good value older Bowmores that were not, where you could not dare speak its name, but
Even the Austin Martin 21 had an alarming amount.
and that the 22, I thought the 22 as the first edition 22 was quite good. Those were bottlings I didn't want to like, but that's a whole different story. What are we thinking, Kurt? You're well into the 25. I'm just letting my mouth run here.
I love it. I love it. I would do anything to have this at a higher strength. 43% is, there's just something about it that just seems like a travesty to a whiskey like this. Why? It's so pointless to neuter it like this. For what you could squeeze out of it, jack your price an extra little bit if you have to. I don't care. Just don't take it down so thin and watery. Pretty tropical. The palate to me is kind of all ashy blueberries, almost like a blueberry jam with a lot of ash to it too. Dry, a little bit cocoa on the palate, lots of that coastal seaside kind of thing. And honestly, more peat than I would have expected from Bowmore at 25 years. It normally doesn't have this much weight of peat to me anyways. Andrew's an old school Bowmore guy like me, probably even more so. He's got a longer history and a deeper history with Jamie and everything there. But this to me is getting way, way closer to what Bowmore used to be and what I fell in love with. You're muted, Andrew.
Sorry, someone was knocking on my door a moment ago. I love Bowmore. I think it's an underappreciated malt. As far as the Isla malts go, like everyone gets really excited about Ardbeg and Lagavulin and Lafroig. And it's this interesting whiskey that's in that middle ground for peated. It's not heavily peated. It's moderately peated. I love the whiskeys that have gone through the #1 vaults warehouse. I'm a Bowmore fan that has an appreciation for moderate amounts of, I guess what we'll call Parma Violets, but have had less PC names in the past. I don't mind that lavender tone creeping in a little bit. So I love the whiskey both with and without that sort of style. I was lucky to get to try a lot of the Bowmores from the late 50s, the early 60s and 70s, which were just incredible. And I've got a big soft spot for it. I think the 15, and I agree with you, Kurt, like I would love to see them at 46. When we used to have that Bowmore 15 Lamrig as an exclusive, that was just killer. It was cast strength Bowmore 15, knocked it out of the park. The 18, I think, is consistently excellent quality. The 25 has had a lot more variability in it, but I still think even with lavender in it has been a good bottling to me. I've always really liked that Bowmore 25. And it's also worth noting quickly, it's the oldest distillery on Isla. It's one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland. It has the oldest continuously used building in the whiskey industry, which is the #1 vaults. And I've said this many times, like that #1 vaults warehouse to me is probably the most spiritual place in the entire Scotch whiskey industry. Getting to go into there, and you can still go in there and do tours, and they'll sample from hand selected casks, but I remember the good old days when you just went in there with a Valanche and either a bung hammer or a bung remover, and you went and tried stuff. And man, those were the days.
Yeah, the 18 right now is a real absolute banger too. Well worth grabbing one. The price is still reasonable. It did go up a little bit not too long ago. But it's backfired on all cylinders too. Two things. When we were at Bowmore a couple months ago, we went on a day when they weren't taking tours, and they opened the distillery for our group. Like, they brought us in, they brought staff in just to take us around. They closed the door behind us and we had the whole distillery to ourselves. It was pretty damn special.
Other,
But not to blow smoke up Andrew's ass here, but years ago, he did an event and James is here too, so it's perfect. An event in Banff where James and his team have done crazy high-end events with Andrew before too. He called it Bowmore on the Rockies, and it was absolutely legendary stuff. We talked about the 50s, 60s kind of Bowmores and stuff. I won't get into that too much. I didn't go to the event, but when Andrew came back from it, he viled off little samples for me of all of those. I think there's 3 blacks, a white, a gold, I think there was another 64 and something else.
yeah.
It was pretty awesome. So he kind of made me a little emotional that day.
Kurt, that's not the only time you've cried in my presence, to be fair.
Not even the first time I've cried tonight, man.
Yeah, I mean, those were some really legendary whiskeys. But I mean, I love the people of Bowmore because I had a reputation for a while. I was the guy from Canada who came in a dress shirt and shorts. And I used to tell this story because I went there one time and I hadn't been there in 3 or 4 years. And I walked through the door and the woman's like, "Hello, Mr. Ferguson, welcome back to Bowmore." And I'm like, "How do you know who I am?" And she's like, "Oh, you're the nice gentleman from Canada who always comes in shorts and a dress shirt." So no word of a lie, Sean and I were there last fall, and we walk into Bowmore, and Margaret, the distillery visitor center manager, is like, "Where are your shorts?" Because I'd put pants on that day. So
Margaret is amazing. She came into the distillery that day we were there to make sure we were taken care of. Her dad was not doing well, and in his last days, she came in, she got us settled, and she went home crying. I was like, "Oh my God, you people are amazing, but go home, go do the family thing. I don't care about this. Like, go." But she's an angel too. Really cool.
I haven't talked enough about the whiskey, but I want to just quickly talk about Bowmore again, because more so than I think almost any other distillery on Isla, I think Bowmore, for the people that work there, is a family. And like the people that work there, they work their entire careers there. Eddie McCaffer, who's the current distillery manager, or sorry, the former distillery manager, passed it on. And Margaret's husband, Kurt, my brain is going like off of me.
Ian, I think.
What's that?
Ian, I think.
No, this will come to me later. I can picture his face, but really nice guy. But they're all just like, they're all very humble people. They're very proud of what they do. They're very proud of where they work.
Yeah.
And incredibly generous and humble people. And yeah, good ambassadors, not just for Bowmore, but for Isla and the industry as a whole. Back to the whiskey really quickly. I think nice balance of bourbon and sherry notes coming out of it. I love, as you said, Kurt, how the peat is still quite strong. It is starting to go into those almost cannabis-like notes again that James mentioned before. Like, I'm getting them more on this than the other one. And salted caramel, the sea air, there's a lot going on in this whiskey. It's very lovely. James, did we let you talk at all about this one?
No, I feel like I need to like come up with some sort of cool Bowmore story. I do actually, I think that any visit to Bowmore, you're automatically going to have a unique experience. Like, there's no way you could visit there and just have like a boring time. But the day I was there, actually, it was extremely windy. And I remember because we were waiting outside. It's the only time I've ever been. And we actually saw, there was a tourist, a woman, she was quite small. She actually blew over. She was on that like dock area, like to the right of the visitor center. And the wind actually blew her onto the ground. So they told us that they were waiting for the wind to die down before they did tours, but that we could walk around if we wanted to. And I remember I walked along the side of the visitor center there, and like the door for the #1 vaults is like right there. And it was open, and I walked in by myself. It was probably 9:30 in the morning. And I just went in and I walked around. I actually have a video somewhere on my computer of this. And I mean, I didn't taste anything, but then I walked out and like no one said anything. It was just like no big deal.
That's crazy. I've only ever seen it locked up. They've had to unlock it for me every time I've gone.
James, I hope this isn't sacrilegious, but did you kneel down and pray to Whiskey Jesus?
Well, just being on the grounds at Bowmore, you do kind of feel like there's like an electric tingle in the air that very few distilleries have that air to them. I mean, a lot of them are on Isla. But I mean, that brings me to my next point, which is that like when you taste Bowmore like this, like it's like a cheat code, right? I mean, some of these great distilleries that in this era of overproduction, you know, we don't get the pure expressions of. And this to me is a prime example of that. Like, you know, this is like reaching for that 10 out of 10 quality whiskey, and it's just not quite there because of some of the production decisions, not because of the spirit itself, which is sad.
Yeah, sure. I did remember, with the help of Google, the distillery manager's name is David Turner. Really nice guy. Yeah, so many great stories involving Bowmore. We'll move on from it, but I love people knowing this fact that the town of Bowmore itself was purpose built in, I believe, 1774, something like that. And it was moved because the Laird of Isla at the time didn't like the fact that the town was obscuring his view of the bay. So he did as you did if you were a laird in the 1700s, you had the town moved. And so when you go to Bowmore today, it's got this incredibly wide main street, goes up about 4 blocks from the pier to the church. And the distillery was built there a few years later, which is one of the reasons why they can tell like how old the distillery actually is. But it's an incredible place to visit if you haven't been to Isla. Scotland, there's so many great places you can visit, but the soul of the whiskey industry really, I think, is on Isla, because that's the sole reason that people are there. Like, and the people who live there and work there know that, and I think you feel that. Let's move on. We've got one last whiskey tonight, which is from a different part of Isla, we presume, but we can't know with 100% certainty. We're on to the Port Askaig 25, which has been a great bottling. We've had it for a couple of years now. It is presumed to be from Kalila, not just because it's called Port Askaig, but because of the style of the whiskey. And I will pull it up here on my screen as soon as I remember not to use the wrong keyboard. So here we go. Port Askaig is a brand owned by Elixir Distillers. They own Single Malts of Scotland, Elements of Isla, and then Port Askaig. Most of what's come out of the Port Askaig range has been from Kalila, but we've also seen some Lafroig, some Bunnahabhain. I'm not sure if we've seen anything other than those three, but the bulk of it has definitely been Kalila. And I think when you nose and taste this is definitely going into that Kalila sort of profile or style. So, Kurt, you're already ahead of me on the nose and you're nodding.
Yeah, I think it's very Kalila-esque. I do get a little bit of Lafroig behind it too. Lafroig, as it gets older, softens quite a bit and gets like a green candy, green GG kind of note to it. I get a little bit of that, and orange, always those two together. I get a little bit of that, but it's way, way, way closer to the Kalila style for me. I'd say I'm like 90% sure this is Kalila.
Well, we know the answer today, Kurt, but I don't know if you know this, because to be honest, I don't, which is why I'm asking. Other than the malt that they peat themselves, where was Lafroig getting, or where prior to Diageo deciding not to play nice with others, where was Lafroig getting the rest of their malt from? Was it from Port Ellen?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I honestly don't. Simpson.
Well, I know the Simpsons thing has been in place since the merger of Bowmore and Suntory and Beam, with Lafroig being under Beam and Bowmore obviously being under Suntory. But before that, like, was it Simpsons as well, or would they have been getting it from? Because that's how old this is.
Yeah, it's been Simpsons for years, but I don't know how far back that goes, honestly.
But when did they stop doing their own?
Well, they still
Basically,
malt their own, but it's only about what, 15%?
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, at most they're doing about 15%. And the reason is, for those who don't know, that floor maltings are extremely time consuming, very labor intensive, and they take up space. And those are things that distilleries like this don't have, is space, time, and the labor is one thing. Like, they'll tell you that floor malting barley, the cost per yield of spirit is something like 3 to 4 times as much as it is to buy malted barley from a commercial malting plant. So it's just,
They only pay half the labor they need to, though, because dumb tourists like us go over there and everybody wants to try turning the malt themselves, and all the
Right.
tourists get them to do it. So half the work is done for free, man.
there's a business model there. Hopefully the Elixir Distillers guys with their new distillery will keep this in mind, because I believe they're putting in a floor maltings too.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get back to the whiskey. Some really nice citrus tones coming off that with the smoke, the salt. It's, for what we assume this to be, it's surprisingly not, the peat is surprisingly not sharp.
Is there any chance that this is Buna?
25-year-old, well, 25-year-old Moynia, from how far back, I guess, would be the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Young Kalila and young Bunnahabhain are really, really close to me, but they do diverge as they get older for me. But mind you, I don't know if I've seen a 25-year-old heavily peated Bunnahabhain for that matter.
This has got to be Kalila. I'm getting the scallops and the bacon.
Yeah.
It's got that sort of thick, overly salted English bacon that's kind of more like what Canadian or Americans think Canadian bacon is like. And those nice sort of scallops and muscle tones coming through. So this has to be Kalila to me.
A lot of fruits, a lot of like really juicy fruit tones, but not really too tropical for me. Just lots of like really juicy, like when you get fruit cocktail or something.
Citric, yeah, like lots of citrus fruits, melons, maybe a bit of like apricot, but not going off the deep end. It's creamy. It's got a nice long finish to it too.
Great balance.
It's a great bottle. Incidentally, for those who, and I know this has gone up, it's still pretty damn reasonably priced at $421 for a 25-year-old Islay whiskey. I know that this and that sister bottling, the 28-year-old Port Askaig, which we believe to be Lefroy, they're going to be in tighter and tighter allocations, and we expect we'll see the prices going up in the future, which is not to begrudge them from doing that, because quite frankly, like, Kurt, what is Lefroy 25 now? Is it
775, I think.
Yeah. So, there's not a lot of old peated Islay stock out there, and the fact that this is still that reasonably priced is almost a bit surprising. James, any comments on this other than your question?
Yeah,
about
I think just like zooming out a little bit from the specifics of the flavor, like, it's just this is a very elegant, ethereal style of Islay whiskey. Like, it almost reminds me of like when you get the broth at like a really awesome like Michelin star seafood restaurant, and like they've had like mushrooms and the fish is cooked in it, and it's this like crystalline broth that has like herbaceous elements. Like, that's what it reminds me of.
You pay yourself too much.
Well, he gets an expense account. He's got to go out and entertain winemakers.
Well, I have to, some of my big retail partners, like, they demand that I take them out for nice dinners so that they'll buy things like casks from me.
Really?
Do I do that for you?
With casks.
If you were in Vancouver, just imagine the expense account.
That's okay. We'll find an opportune time to go for dinner somewhere. All right.
You got to work with Louis Roeder more. That's in my portfolio. That's when you get to go to restaurants like that.
Fair. I mean, yeah, it's a fair comment. All right. Bernadette did mention the Port Askaig 28. They're not expecting any more. So what we've got is what we've got. And if you're not familiar with that one, I'll put the link in the chat here. You can go have a look at it. It's $500, and there's less than a lot of that to be had. So, and I keep remembering I've got 2 keyboards here and I'm copying on the wrong one. There's probably some weird emails going out from my account tonight. There we go. All right, speed round, gents. Back to the single malts of Scotland, Speyside 25. How is that one showing? God, it's so decadent.
Yeah, in hindsight, this might be the richest whiskey in the lineup.
Birthday cake.
This-
Fruit flan.
This is like going into a tourist trap toffee emporium. Like every tourist town has them where you go in and they've got like homemade toffees and they can cut them off for you in chunks. Or fudge, like it's very fudgy, like kind of vanilla fudge.
Oh man, palate is awesome right now. So awesome. A little bit of a like tangy grapefruit note on the back.
Oh man,
So good on the palate.
big citrus, going tropical, really, really decadent. That is a
Right.
banger of a malt.
Igor's
You can
ready.
get you know, you can get coconut oil in like a solid form for cooking.
Mm.
Like that's what this reminds me of. It's like a
Coconut
spoon.
butter, James. It makes the best popcorn. It'll shorten your life, but it makes the best popcorn.
Well, and this is what you pair it with, right?
That's right. All right, what have we got next? Glenfarclas 25.
43% is not high enough. It's kind of, after an hour, it's kind of falling apart a little bit.
It's kind of struggling to keep up, but what's there is good.
Yeah, that fresh baking note, it kind of like devolves into almost like a weird plastic, like just opened a magazine type of smell.
Mm.
The palate's holding up really well though.
Mhm.
Palate, I think, is better than it was the first time around. The nose is just a little bit shy. I think you need that level of oils on the top in unchill filtered whiskeys to be able to hold for an hour and a half in the glass without oxidizing it too heavily.
Sure is drinkable though.
Sure is. And again, the palate is better at this point.
All right. Balblair 25. Man,
Nose is better than the first time, I think.
so meaty, chocolatey.
I would love a little bit more aroma to come off of this to get really excited about it.
Palate's just okay for me right now. Nose is great though.
It got me doing some quick digging because I don't remember. I was wondering, it had me starting to wonder if Balblair maybe had worm tubs as well. Because I find that it's got a thicker, heavier, oilier, almost meatier spirit to it. But that might just be the weight of the sherry. Linkwood 25.
With all of those fruits, I'm getting a little bit of like sunflower seeds and fresh potting soil.
It's so fresh and alive. Thank
Yeah.
goodness this is 46% now.
The palate is fleshy. Lots of fruit.
Palate is great. Again, I think better than the first time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, good finish too. Stays juicy.
Cool. All right. Mortlach 25.
Mortlach's like I'm in front of this great fruit buffet and somebody runs by after like with a charred steak on a platter or something.
Thought you were going to say that someone like, I don't know, crop dusted. I thought that's where you were going to go with that. We can all picture that person walking by with a huge tray of food, crop dusting everybody else standing in front of it. The nose is, to me, it's very beefy. I think I can see where you're going with that little bit of sulfur tinge on the nose, but
Again, spirit sulfur is different than cask flaw sulfur, right?
Mhm.
It's just a matter of the way the whiskey's produced. That's not a flaw to me, and that's just a characteristic. I'm okay with that. Every now and then it doesn't work.
but- I like the palate, and I have to say, I like the palate on this better than the Linkwood. I think the back end of this is starting to get tropical. It's getting very fruity. That meaty tone is still there, but it's not dominating everything else. There's a raw leather edge to it too, but there's some nice fruits in this that are coming out for me.
Yeah, palate's getting better.
I like the front end of the Linkwood and the back end of the Mortlach. Has anyone ever mixed these two together 50-50?
I'm gonna do that right now. Let's see what happens. All right.
I'm mixing dribs and drabs at this point because these glasses are looking a little bit Saharan.
So would this be Linklack
Linklach.
or
Mortwood?
Mortwood? Linklack or Mortwood?
I think they're better individually.
You need a marrying period, Kurt.
Oh my God.
Yes.
James, have we created the Cairn blended malts? I'm just saying.
No, the Cairns taste like 1980s Macallan's.
I'm just kidding. If they put Macallan into those whiskeys at the Cairn, that even put them up another notch in my book. For
I
those
am
who don't
sworn to
know,
secrecy, but there very well may be in a few of them.
for those who don't know, the Cairn is Gordon MacPhail's new distillery. I know James made a reference to it earlier. And you can go to that distillery for a tour, a high-end tour, and pay for a tasting that includes a 55 and a 70-year-old blended malt. Gordon MacPhail created 55 and 70-year-old blended malts from single malts that other people would happily sell for their distillery, which is incredible. No one else would have done this. It is possibly the most Gordon MacPhail thing you could do, and I absolutely love it. So, Glengoyne 25, where is that one at? Man, the chocolate, the leather, clove, licorice.
Way more chocolatey this time around.
Yeah, Tootsie Rolls.
So oily. Yeah, Tootsie Rolls is a good call, James. I like that one.
That's delicious.
Classic Christmas cake notes creeping in. Nice balance to it. I mean, that's a great malt. Very well put together. Nice selection of casks. Bowmore 25. Starting to see that lavender a little bit.
A little bit more rubbery now.
You know,
Does
when
make me think, like when these are like 40, 50 years old, are they going to taste like those 1960s Bowmores? I feel like they might actually be going in that direction.
they might. I mean, I think the one flaw of anything in all this is that we put this at the back of the lineup because there's peat in it, but it's so soft. I almost think it could have gone ahead of probably everything but the Balblair 25. And it would have probably shown better in this lineup tonight because the peat in there is so faint. It's only knocking, I know Kurt, you mentioned this before, is that 43. If this was 46 or a touch higher, I think this would have been a great bottling. It's good, but for that 43.
Yeah, I dream of this at like 50 even.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
All right, last one, Port Askaig, 25.
Seared seafood now at this point for me.
Yeah, that poached scallops note is so distinct.
A little bit of almond on the palate, very Kalilask on the palate now.
It's the most consistently good whiskey in all of Scotland. Although to be said, I have had some disappointing Kalilas recently, but on the average, it is that. And this is a great 25-year-old.
I think the only disappointing Kalilas I ever find are the ones that went into the wrong casks, or they were served too young.
By chance, accepting a recent Gordon MacPhail bottling, do you mean wine casks?
Yeah, perhaps. Hey, that new one is really damn good, man.
That is definitely an Eat Crow bottling for the two of us, because every time I see it, I'm like, why did they do that? And then, it's actually that's the new Sassicaia Kalila that we're alluding to. It is gorgeous. If we're not sold out of it, you should get one because it is a gorgeous bottling. All right, polls. I need to put the poll up here. Evan created it, which is great. I believe you're able to vote now. So we'll leave that up for a couple of minutes to let you vote. While you're doing that, we'll maybe tease a little bit. I've got something on my desk I can show you that's coming soon. We have a new Kilholman cast coming soon, a 10-year-old 100% Isla. We're going to be launching this in early November, late October, right around Halloween-ish. So this is coming out soon. We have another new cask that just landed. I honestly didn't think we were going to get this until next year, but we've got a 24-year-old undisclosed Speyside whiskey from that boutique whiskey company. Kurt, do you remember like what distillery they told us that's from? Is it Balvenie?
They didn't really tell us, but a similar labeled, named, whatever one, their notes on it said something about "you're gonna Glen love it."
Oh, so it might be Glenlivet then. That's where we're.
Dad joke extraordinaire. I'm a little bit jealous I didn't come up with that one myself, but good for them.
And I can actually share a little teaser of this one because I have the label artwork. This is coming down the pipe. So there it is there. I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid you can't name this. So, little riff, it's from their Boutique Cinema series. We had an opportunity to pick this up, 47.8%. The price on it relative to age, and even considering it's a 500 ml bottle, I think it's going to be 175 is pretty damn good. And the sample was gorgeous. So that's coming. And not just because James is here, but we have a Glenfarclas coming as well too. What's that?
Very soon.
Very soon. And it's the first of two, because for some reason we found a second Glenfarclas that we happen to like. The second, James, if I recall correctly, is dumpier than the first. Would that be a fair assertion?
Yeah, we have pre-dumpy and post-dumpy.
Post-dumpy, yeah. So there's a dumpy Glenfarclas coming, but not until next year. But there's a not dumpy one coming this fall. So things to be excited about.
Yeah, the first one bears a lot of similarities to that single malts of Scotland Speyside.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's a cool whiskey. So we're excited to see that. So I'm going to check in on the poll here and see how that poll's doing. All but two of you have voted. So you got 30 seconds, or I'm going to call it. Actually, I can let that run. Kurt, I'm going to ask you, and I'm not going to let you have two. I'm going to let you have three. What were your three favorites tonight?
Number one for me is the Bowmore 25. Number two for me is the Port Askaig. And number three would be the SMO Speyside 25. I never really go for the big heavy peated ones as my favorites typically. That Bowmore just really grabbed me tonight. Great batch. And that Port Askaig, fantastic palate on that. Wow.
Yeah. Kurt. Okay. James, what were your three favorites?
Yeah, I mean that Bowmore at higher concentration would have stole it for me, but yeah, as it stands, this isn't usually the style of whiskey I reach for, but that Glengoyne 25 I thought was just like absolutely banging today. That was probably my number one. Number two, I'm going to go with the Linkwood 25. I just thought just a very typical, like lively, just fresh, zippy batch. And yeah, if it had a bit more complexity, my third place was the SMOS. I just love that style. That's a style that I reach for at home probably the most.
What's the most drinkable?
Yeah, it's just it was lacking like a few little bonus complexities that would have put it into the stratosphere for me, but still like super drinkable.
Cool. All right. I'm going SMOS 25 because I think that one punches above its weight more than anything else in this lineup. Glengoyne 25 is my number two. And I really wanted to vote for that Bowmore, but I'm going to have to give it to the Port Askaig 25. I think it edges it out just a little bit. I would really love to see that Bowmore just a couple degrees higher. I think it would show way better, but I honestly didn't think that that SMOS would stand up as well as it did amongst this range. And James, I think your comments are fair. Like, it is probably not the most complex whiskey in the whole lineup, but it is so dangerously drinkable. So I really, really liked that. All right, let's see what the votes were. I'll pull the poll up here. So we're going to end that. One more of you found the way to vote, so I'll share with everyone here. So here are the results. Glengoyne 25 is the whiskey of the night. Port Askaig 25 came in a close second, and the single malts of Scotland Speyside showed up number 3. Second favorite, look at this. It is a tie behind the single malts of Scotland, or it's a 3-way tie. Single malts of Scotland, Speyside 25, G&M distillery label Linkwood 25, and the Port Askaig 25. So very, very interesting indeed. And I believe, I'm just going to go back to the first round. Everybody got a vote. So how about that? How many times do you have 8 whiskeys in a lineup and everyone gets at least a vote? Everyone gets a ribbon. It's like gym class in the 1980s. Everyone gets your participation badge or whatever it was we got back then. James, I want to thank you for stepping up last minute and coming in as a co-host tonight.
No, thanks for having me, and yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, you're always a nice addition to the crew. Kurt, thank you as always. I want to thank all of you for taking part in tonight's tasting, and apologies for starting late. I am blaming Telus on this one. This is not Kensington time, which is also a thing. I was ready to go. The internet was not. Thanks for joining tonight. I really sincerely hope you enjoyed it. We'll look forward to seeing you at another tasting soon. Next week, we are going to drop a couple of new tastings, including a Sherry Bombs tasting. So keep your eye out for that, and 1 or 2 other things. Those will be coming down the pipeline. But have a great night. We'll talk soon, and we'll see you on the other side.